do 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 do
Good morning, Acadiana. You are listening to Local News Live, a production of AOC Community Media in partnership with our friends over at the Acadiana Advocate. I am Matt Roberts. I will be your news reader this morning on Monday, June 22nd. It's 9 a.m. It is 77 degrees outside at 84% humidity and 20% chance of precipitation with a 72 degree Fahrenheit dew point. Wind is headed southwest. And that's a little weather addition to this morning's news. I'll be reading your news. Bruce Cohen, your regular reader, may be joining us at some point this morning. But until then, I'm glad to deliver the news that the Advocate, the journalists over at the Advocate, so graciously provide us every day. So here is the news right here on AOC Community Media, AOC 1, Cypress Street Radio, and of course our YouTube page. If you search for AOC Community Media, you will find our YouTube channel there where you can rewatch the news later if you need to. All right, so let's just get started with our news this morning. Early voters trickle in, turnout down sharply compared to past elections in Lafayette by Katie Gagliano. Roughly 150 Lafayette Parish residents trickled to the polls Saturday for the first day of presidential primary early voting as Louisiana undergoes its first test balancing voting access and coronavirus mitigation in the lead-up to fall's general election. Whether because of the coronavirus pandemic or the limited ballot, the volume of voters was down starkly Saturday compared with an average first day of early voting, Lafayette Parish Registrar of Voters Charlene Menard said. The longtime registrar said she's accustomed to arriving at the Lafayette Street site to a line of voters waiting for the doors to open. Saturday morning, there was only one woman, she said. The primary is a closed-party election. Only registered Democrats and Republicans can cast ballots to select their presidential candidate and representatives for the party's respective local executive committee and for the Democrats, the state central committee. The morning is usually the busy period, Menard said, but by 11 a.m., the early polling site had seen only 60 voters. At day's end, the number reached only 162 people. A far cry from the average 1,000 people the office is used to seeing, Menard reported. The registrar said she understands voters may be hesitant because of the novel coronavirus pandemic. We're just as scared as them, and we're taking the precautions to stay safe, Menard said. Poll workers are donning the protective gowns, gloves, and masks, and are seated behind plexiglass stations, and are wiping down everything voters come into contact with, including pens, the voting machines, and electronic voter cards after each use, she said. Menard said markers are spaced 6 feet apart. If voters need to queue, voters must wait in the lobby downstairs or line up outside to prevent crowding in enclosed spaces, and hand sanitizer is available. Voters are also asked to bring their own pen and mask. While masks aren't required to cast a ballot, they are encouraged, she said. The registrar said she's hopeful volunteer numbers will increase in the coming days. Voters can cast early ballots from 8:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. daily, except Sunday through July 4th. Kimberly Bibbins of Youngsville is a regular early voter and said when she arrived Saturday she thought the polling location was closed because of how quiet it was. It was Bibbins and her family members are vigilant mask wearers, and she said she expects the same from local officials and was pleased to see the safety precautions taken Saturday. One precaution allowing voters to scan their own licenses also made the process feel more hands-on and secure, she said. The 40-year-old said she appreciated being able to verbally confirm her name and address with the poll worker and have more involvement in the process. Beth and Jude Chasson of Lafayette said they were a little apprehensive about bringing their 9-year-old son, Austin, to the polls because of the virus and their uncertainty about how crowded and safe the experience would be, but they said it was swift and well managed. I'm really big about not skipping any elections, but this one I felt that maybe we could have skipped and it wouldn't have been a big deal. But I'm glad we got the experience to know what it's going to be like for the next one, which is going to be really big and really important, Beth Chasson said. The Chassons said the registrar's safety precautions were expected but still jarring to see in person. Their seriousness was appreciated and confirmed that election officials are at least thinking about the virus safety, which will be critical during the fall presidential election, they said. People still need to come out to vote and make their voices heard, Juice Chasson said. The Chassons said they hope officials will consider in-person voting alternatives like expanded mail ballots or other creative measures like the ability to sign up for a voting time to prevent long lines and voting pileups like have been seen in other states. Bibbins said she thinks early voting will be increasingly important for the presidential election in the fall. Menard said many voters 65 and older are applying for mail ballots after a push from the Louisiana Secretary of State, who mailed letters to the homes of qualified registered voters with an application and a prepaid address and envelope sent to the application to the local registrar's office. Since then, the number of mail-in ballots requested for the primary has risen from an average of 1,800 to over 6,000 and continues to increase, the registrar said. Just Saturday, Menard's office was processing dozens of additional requests. Not everyone has been pleased by the vote by mail push for older residents. Menard shuffled through a loose stack of applications mailed to her office, scrawled with profanities like, "This is BS," that's abbreviated, and it's been edited in the paper, and rants about mail-in voting, compromising of elections. The registrar said she doesn't see it that way. "I feel fortunate enough to say we protect our voters, and I believe in the system," Menard said. All right, folks, and just bear with me. I'm double checking. It seems like I am getting some calls, but those calls will have to wait. It's nothing to do with the show, but that's what I wanted to check on, was to see if it was part of the show. Okay, so excuse me while I take a little sip of coffee here. Again, you're listening to Local News Live on June 22nd, 2020. Our next story in today's paper: LGBT ruling may not affect Catholic schools. Experts say they could be protected from suits. This is by Ken Stickney, staff writer for The Advocate. Catholic schools, including Lafayette's, that bar lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender teachers may be protected from lawsuits under federal law, despite a Supreme Court ruling issued last week that shields their unemployment under civil rights law. Two LSU law school professors said the court's 6-3 decision revealed Monday in Bostock versus Clayton County said gay employees are protected under Civil Rights Act of 1964, known as Title VII, which forbids job discrimination for, among other reasons, sex. In writing the majority's opinion, Justin Neil Gorsuch said that firing an employee for being homosexual or transgender fires that person for traits or actions it would not have questioned in the members of a different sex. The Diocese of Lafayette has, in the past, required that Catholic teachers must sign a morality clause that bans anyone who is gay, uses birth control, or was not married in the church from teaching in the diocese's Catholic schools, according to news reports in 2013. Back then, an art teacher at Our Lady of Fatima Elementary School in Lafayette was not allowed to return the following school year because she said she was gay and would not sign the clause. Ken Levi Holt B. Harrison, professor of law at LSU, said he believes that if a religious institution fires a gay or transsexual employee, it would likely win in federal court despite the June 15th ruling, he said. He said Title VII provides a big exemption for religious institutions, which don't have to abide by all the restrictions. Along the same lines, he said, is the ministerial exception that essentially says religious institutions have a First Amendment right to exercise their religion, and that the government cannot interfere with it. Further, he said, The 1993 Religious Freedom Restoration Act gives broader leeway to religious institutions. So, for example, if a church believes gay or transgender lifestyles are wrong, it is not required to hire or keep employed workers who profess otherwise. Levi said employees cannot contradict the mission of the church that employs them. Bostock was sweeping, Levi said of the Supreme Court's latest decision on the matter, but not sweeping enough to overturn morality clauses. But, he added, employment agreements don't necessarily permit absolute freedom. For example, he said, he holds an academic tenure, but his employment would be endangered if he committed a crime. William Corbett, Frank L. Marist, professor of law, and Wex S. Malone, professor of law at LSU, said what would be relevant for protecting Catholic schools like those in Lafayette that might fire openly gay teachers is that the Catholic schools are used for propagation of the faith. But he was less certain about the overall protection of Catholic schools that bar or fire some gay or transgender teachers. For example, he said, does it serve a Catholic school's mission to have a Catholic math teacher? So, it might be hard to see what teaching math would have to do with propagation of the faith, he said. Another exception to Bostock, he suggested, might be bona fide occupational qualifications law, which roughly means an employer must provide a requirement, such as adherence to the tenets of faith is needed for the success of the business. That exception, for example, permits churches to require its clergy to be of a certain faith. That exception has been interpreted to include more than clergy members, but also teachers, although it does not, for example, give churches the right to discriminate against applicants of other faiths for jobs such as janitor, which don't specifically serve the faith. The superintendent of Lafayette's Catholic schools, Anna Levees, pardon that pronunciation, through her assistant, deferred questions about morality clauses and the court ruling to the Diocese of Lafayette's communication office. The diocesan spokeswoman was on vacation. A request for an interview with Lafayette Bishop Douglas Desautels went unanswered. Our next story this morning, headline, Youngsville Adjusts its 4th of July Celebration, by Megan Wyatt, a staff writer for the Acadiana Advocate. Youngsville's 4th of July celebration will look different this year because of the coronavirus crisis. The city's annual Independence Day event usually draws thousands to Sugar Mill Pond for a day of family-friendly activities before a large fireworks show. Because of COVID-19 restrictions, this year's event will include only the fireworks display, which will be viewable in a number of ways from a safe distance. The fireworks show will happen at 9 p.m. July 3rd at the Youngsville Sports Complex, 801 Savoie Road. People are encouraged to watch from their backyards, front porches, outside of local businesses, or via live video on the city's Facebook page. People can also park at the sports complex beginning at 7:30 p.m. to watch the show. Lawn chairs and blankets are allowed, but ice chests are not. Concessions will be available for purchase. You can visit facebook.com/City of Youngsville to learn more. And I'll just have a little sip of coffee. It's a nice drizzly morning. It's a little bit gray this morning, but it's cooled off a little bit. I am reporting this news from my back porch. And we'll also, while I'm taking a sip of my coffee, just check in to make sure that Bruce hasn't joined the meeting yet. He hasn't, and he may not be able to. I know he had another appointment this morning. Thank you all for tuning in to Local News Live on June 22nd, Monday. Man arrested in June 14th shooting that left 5 injured. This story is also by Megan Wyatt. Lafayette police have arrested a 21-year-old man in connection to last weekend's downtown shooting that injured 5 people. Aaron Gutierrez was booked into the Lafayette Parish Correctional Center on counts of attempted second-degree murder, negligent injuring, and illegal use of a weapon. Investigators with the Lafayette Police Department determined Gutierrez was suspect through reviewing video surveillance in the 400 block of Jefferson Street where the shooting took place about 2 a.m. June 14th. Gutierrez was one of the 5 people injured in the shooting and one of the 4 people hospitalized as a result. He was arrested after being released from the hospital, being held in jail in lieu of $250,000 bail. Last week, police arrested Keodrick Sam, 19, in connection to the shooting, but he was released after investigators reviewed surveillance video of the incident. Sam also was wounded and hospitalized during the shooting. We really believed he was involved based on the things we were getting from the witnesses and the things people were telling us, said Sergeant Wayne Griffin of the Lafayette Police Department. But we received some video footage late in the investigation that cleared Mr. Sam of any wrongdoing. The incident took place outside of Legends, 413 Jefferson Street, after a verbal argument turned physical. When police arrived at the scene, 3 people were suffering from gunshot wounds to their upper torso and 2 people were suffering from gunshot wounds to their lower torsos. Griffin said some of the victims were innocent bystanders based on witness statements and video surveillance. None of the victims suffered life-threatening injuries, and all have been released from the hospital, according to Griffin. No additional arrests are expected in the case. And our next story at 9:16 a.m. this morning is GOP efforts to cut Louisiana business taxes face roadblocks. We have to balance the budget. This story is written by Tyler Bridges of The Advocate. Republican legislators are advancing tax breaks to businesses that would cost the state hundreds of millions of dollars over the next 5 years, even though Louisiana is facing a major budget gap next year unless Congress decides to provide a massive infusion of cash to states. Many of the nearly 20 measures pushed by lawmakers to run counter to recommendations of a blue ribbon task force created by the Republican-led legislature. In 2017, it called legislators to eliminate tax loopholes in order to lower tax rates and simplify the tax code. The legislature did not approve the recommendations. Some of the measures advancing under the current legislation would expand tax breaks that haven't proven to benefit the state treasury or are being pitched as helping mom and pop businesses, but would actually benefit big companies. Supporters of each tax break claim, usually with little or no evidence, that the break will pay for itself by generating a wave of investment and job creation. Republicans in the House have taken the lead in trying to push through the tax cuts, both during the regular session that ended on June 1st and during the special session that ends on June 30th. They say they are trying to help small businesses hurting from the collapsed economy. It appears that key senators will try and limit the breadth and the cost of tax bills in the coming days. A key test vote came Thursday before the Senate Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Committee when it considered House Bill No. 4, which would expand a popular tax credit from rehabilitating historic structures. With a dozen proponents looking on, 2 of them testified that a 2017 study by the Lieutenant Governor's Office showed every $1 in tax credit generated 42 cents in tax revenue, even before the developer claims the credit. But State Senator Brett Allen, Republican Franklin, the committee chairman, got his colleagues to pare the tax credit in half to $75 million per year. It had been forecast to hit $150 million this year, according to the Revenue Department, and the extended tax break to 2023, not 2028, as proponents wanted. "We're not like the federal government," Allen said in an interview afterward. "We can't print money. We have to balance the budget at the end of the day. By approving too many tax breaks," he added, "the money won't be available to spend on health care and higher ed." Sorry, my place jumped. And next fiscal year, we'll have to make cuts in areas we don't want to make cuts to. State Senator Jay Morris, Republican Monroe, applauded Allen's efforts to curtail tax breaks. "The COVID federal money we have coming in is masking deeper financial issues we have," said Morris, who sponsored the 2016 legislation that temporarily suspended many businesses' sales tax breaks amid financial shortfall. "We need to be cautious about granting incentives and not be too exuberant. Tax bills that pass through Allen's committee must also win approval from the Senate Finance Committee before advancing to the full Senate." That committee's chairman, State Senator Bodie White, Republican Central, did not return calls seeking his views on the tax breaks. Legislators have been handing out more and more tax breaks for years, always in the name of creating jobs and investment. The giveaways have not generated enough economic activity to solve the state's ongoing budget problems, however. During Kathleen Blanco's 4 years as governor, the value of some Louisiana's largest tax breaks doubled. Since Bobby Jindal took the reins in 2008, the cost has more than doubled again. The Advocate reported in 2014 investigation giving away Louisiana. In 2016, the newly seated legislature and the new governor, John Bel Edwards, faced a $2 billion deficit inherited from Jindal. The lawmakers passed a temporary 1-cent increase in the sales tax, suspended a host of sales tax exemptions for 27 months, and created the 13-member task force headed by Kimberly Robinson, the Revenue Secretary, and Jim Richardson, the LSU economist, to study the state's tax and spending policies. A failure to act is not an option, the Commission reported in January 2017, but that's the option lawmakers chose. They weren't willing to challenge the business and local government interests that lobbied to protect the tax breaks. Last year, for every $9 the state collected, it gave away 6 in the form of tax credits and exemptions, according to the Louisiana Tax Exemption Budget, a little-known document produced annually by the Department of Revenue. The big giveaways have not stopped Republicans from wanting to give away more. House Republicans aggressively began the big tax cut push for businesses during regular session. With House Bill 506, State Representative Philip DeVilliers, Republican Eunice, sponsored a reduction in the oil and gas severance tax that he said, without providing any evidence, would encourage a rebound in drilling. The bill's fiscal note said it would cost the state $150 million over 5 years. When we start bringing jobs back, the production will go up and we'll start collecting more in severance taxes, DeVilliers told members of the House Ways and Means Committee on May 18th. When production goes up, you'll see tax revenue go up. Robinson labeled as highly speculative the claim that increased production would generate enough tax revenue to offset the loss from lower rates. The House overwhelmingly approved HB 506, but it died without getting a vote in Alan's committee. State Representative Stuart Bishop, Republican Lafayette, proposed House Concurrent Resolution 66, which would have delivered a major hit to the state budget by suspending collection of the corporate franchise tax for 1 year. The cost to the Treasury would have been $378 million, according to the Legislative Fiscal Office. Facing complaints over that price tag, lawmakers amended HCR 66 to reduce only a small portion of the franchise tax for 1 year at a cost of $5.4 million. They approved the measure. The move to cut business taxes has continued during the special session that began on June 1st. The House approved House Bill 19, which would make retailers, restaurants, and hotels eligible for an existing tax incentive known as the Quality Jobs Program. HB 19, sponsored by State Rep. Thomas Presley, Republican Shreveport, would cost up to $165 million over 5 years, according to a Revenue and Fiscal Affairs spreadsheet. After 5 years, the program would discontinue unless legislators renewed it. In March, the Louisiana Legislative Auditor recommended, based on a review of 59 recipients of the Quality Jobs Program, that lawmakers go in the opposite direction by limiting it. HB 19 is now before Alan's committee. The House also approved House Bill 13, which would mirror Presley's bill by expanding controversial tax breaks for investment in enterprise zones to include retailers, restaurants, and hotels. Under the current law, the program is projected to cost $52 million this year, according to the Department of Revenue. The Legislative Fiscal Office estimates that the cost would increase by $75 million over the next 5 years under HB 13, which is sponsored by State Representative Mark Wright, Republican Covington. Like Presley's bill, it would sunset in 2025 unless lawmakers voted to renew it. The goal is to try and entice businesses to continue operating over a few years, Wright said in an interview, adding that he wanted to amend HB 13 to limit eligibility to retailers, restaurants, and hotels that have fewer than 50 employees. The Enterprise Zone tax break is supposed to give taxpayer money to businesses that relocate or expand in economically depressed areas. But the Advocate reported in 2014 that the state had awarded nearly $700,000 in tax credits for Walmart to build new stores in Covington and Mandeville, two of Louisiana's most affluent suburbs. HB 13 is also now before Alain's committee in the interview. Alain expressed concern about HB 13's cost, but said it and the other bills will get a fair hearing. The House also provided overwhelming support for another cut in the corporate franchise tax that would cost the Treasury $40 million over 5 years. Bishop, the sponsor of House Bill 17, told his colleagues that they would offer relief to the small mom and pops. State Representative Ted James, Democrat Baton Rouge, contested Bishop's claim, saying small businesses do not pay franchise taxes. Stop using COVID, the pandemic, to pass bad tax legislation. And folks, that story was quite a mouthful, but it was full of relevant information. If you are paying attention to politics in any way, but not paying attention to your local politics, that's something that I would highly recommend, and I think a lot of people highly recommend, because it's where you have the most input. If you want to feel heard, local politics is the way to do it. So I highly encourage people to, you can re-listen to that story, or you can do, what's probably better for your brain. Go read that story at theadvocate.com, because it's full of information and figures which you traditionally don't get in broadcast media because it doesn't transfer conversationally as well. It's harder for us to absorb those things via our ears than our eyes. And that's your little media literacy lesson from me, Matt Roberts, your newsreader this morning. That's not a part of The Advocate. That's part of AOC's general teaching about media literacy. I'll bring you another story here in just a second. I'm going to sip my coffee and check our meeting room to make sure that our volunteer Bruce has not popped in. He hasn't. All right. Our next story this morning, Saharan dust bringing pretty sunsets, health risks for some, by Mark Schleifstein. A vast cloud of Saharan dust now crossing the Atlantic Ocean will arrive in South Louisiana by Wednesday, bringing with it the potential to dampen hurricane threats, create spectacular sunsets, and exacerbate respiratory problems for people with health conditions, including children. The dust, which consists of tiny mineral rock sand particles from desert areas in Africa, is a frequent summer visitor to North America. Though it's nearly invisible, it makes its presence felt in a variety of ways. We can expect an uptick in asthma and allergy conditions, especially in children, said Dr. James Diaz, director of the Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences program at the LSU Health Sciences Center in New Orleans. Asthma is a risk factor for COVID-19, and the increased risk from the dust could include increases in cases of the Kawasaki-like inflammatory syndrome that COVID-19 has caused in a small number of children, Diaz said. Scientists grouped the dust into two sizes, PM 2.5 for particles measuring 2.5 microns or smaller, and PM 10 for particles 10 microns or smaller. Micron is short for the micrometer, which is about 0.00004 inches. It's very small. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has set a 24-hour standard of 65 microns per cubic meter for PM 2.5 and 150 microns per cubic meter for PM 10. And it's likely that the Saharan dust, combined with particulate matter already in the air from chemical pollution, will require the State Department of Environmental Quality to issue air quality alerts for some state locations next week. Desert sand is microscopic quartz, compared to beach sand, which is microscopic seashell, Diaz said. The particles are charged and can carry pathogens into the lungs, like viruses, bacteria, and fungi. Therefore, respiratory infections will increase as well. He said the particles are also likely to increase problems with patients with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease related to bronchitis and could cause heart attacks among those with coronary artery disease. The health issues associated with the Saharan dust have been documented in recent years in studies conducted among residents in the Caribbean and in Houston, according to Joseph Prospero, Emeritus Professor of Atmospheric Sciences at the University of Miami, who has been studying the dust outbreaks for 60 years. Saharan sand outbreaks are common in the early summer months, Prospero said, typically forming over broad areas of the southern Saharan desert in Algeria, Libya, and northern Niger. Intense heating of the Earth's surface combined with windy conditions causes the particles to be lifted into the upper levels of the atmosphere to heights of 3.5 to 4.5 miles. There, they can be blown west as part of a layer of hot, dry air atop easterly tropical waves crossing the Atlantic Ocean. The present dust outbreak is streaming west from an 850-mile-wide stretch of the African coast, and its outer edge was already raining particles as small as 70 microns on Barbados, the French Guiana, he said. The most visible effect of the Saharan dust is likely to be more colorful sunrises and sunsets in southeastern Louisiana, said Kevin Gilmore, a meteorologist with the Slidell Office of National Weather Service. As the sun starts filtering through the haze caused by the particles, it can cause really brilliant sunrises and sunsets with dark orange to pink colors, he said. Another positive effect stems from the warm, dry air carrying the Saharan dust and the high wind layer in which it is contained. The winds can chop apart clouds trying to form thunderstorms, and the dry air can reduce the ability of the atmosphere to support thunderstorm creation, necessary to form tropical storms and hurricanes. The Saharan atmospheric layer is a bit like Big Ben, said Jason Dunyan, a research scientist with the NOAA's Hurricane Research Center in Miami, who tracks the dust to study how it reduces the ability of hurricanes to form in the Atlantic. It's actually quite amazing how, like clockwork, SAL activity, larger outbreaks that reach farther west, ramps up in June and keeps at a fast and furious pace from late June until early August. Data collected from satellites and instruments dropped from research airplanes into the dust layer can be uploaded into hurricane forecast models to help predict the layer's effect. He said data collection efforts off the coast of Africa by NASA and around Barbados by NOAA have been rescheduled from this summer to next year because of pandemic issues. We'll be bringing new instruments to look at the winds, moisture, and dust in the SAL, and we'll also have our trusty dropsondes instrument packages that released from planes to sample the full depth of SAL outbreaks. Dunyan said, "Our plan is to transmit all of our dropsonde data in real time during the campaign so that the modeling centers can ingest the data and so that it will be available to forecasters at the National Hurricane Center," he said. Other researchers have been studying the effects of the dust as it falls into the ocean. Recent studies have linked iron contained in the sand to blooms of trichodesmium, a one-celled cyanobacteria also known as sea sawdust, in waters off southwest Florida. The bacteria blooms die and sink to the bottom of the Gulf where they decompose and release dissolved organic nitrogen. The nitrogen in turn stimulates blooms of Carenia brevis, a type of toxic algae that causes red tides. The freshwater of the Mississippi and Atchafalaya rivers help keep local salinity levels low enough for red tide events from spreading west of the Mississippi border, said Nancy Rabelais, a marine biologist with LSU. A different cyanobacteria that is found in deeper waters off the Louisiana Gulf Coast might be affected by the dust, but it has not been seen as a problem, she said. The dust also stimulates growth of many groups of marine plankton, which can have both positive and negative effects, said Elizabeth Otteson, a microbiologist at the University of Georgia. This can be both good and bad from our perspective, she said. It can increase productivity and feed the marine food web, but it can also stimulate the growth of harmful algae and bacteria. In a recent study, she and her team of researchers observed a series of blooms where most of the organisms were harmless to humans, but she said the blooms did include species of Vibrio, which can cause disease. And that is the end of that story. That's an interesting story to hear about dust coming across the Atlantic. And also interesting is we are now joined by Bruce Cohen this morning. Bruce, how are you, buddy?
Oh, I am doing fantastic. Just had a little business meeting I had to take care of this morning with my blood. I had to donate, I had to give a little bit of blood this morning, first thing. So I'm sorry about that. Sorry being late.
Oh, no worries.
Thank you for coming in. If you wish, I can take it from now, or we can go back and forth, however you want to do it. I can just take the next last half hour if you wish.
Well, Bruce, I think I will give you that last half hour if you want it, and
Okay.
if you want to start
Absolutely.
on entertainment or anything, that's fine. I've left off at page 15, so I'm right on the next story.
Right.
Story.
I know exactly where you're at.
Excellent.
Have you been able to give out any public service announcements this morning?
I did not even do that, so if you wanted to start off with that would be great. Thank you so much, Bruce. I will listen to Cypress Street.
And we'll see you in a little bit. Thanks, Matt.
Sounds good, buddy.
Okay. All right. Well, good morning, Acadiana. Thank you for listening to Matt. He does a great job with the news. And you probably hear my voice most mornings. Excuse me. Like I said, I did have to do a little bit of bloodletting this morning for my doctor's visit this week. But I'm here to read you the rest of the news. So let's go right to the public service announcements. Camp Unique at Dreams Foundation every summer. The Dreams Foundation of Acadiana hosts the greatest camp of all, Camp Unique. Camp Unique is suited for individuals with special needs. Camp Unique will be held July 13th through 17th for ages 5 through 13, July 20th through the 24th for ages 14 and up. Fee will be $75, and the theme this year will be Peace and Love. All Camp Unique sessions will be held at Lark's Acadian Village. Individuals of all ages have a blast participating at a camp that is specifically tailored to them. They get the opportunity to take part in such activities as art, fitness, karaoke, music, and dance, as well as getting a Camp Unique t-shirt and a snack every day. Highlight of Camp Unique this year will be the storytelling session by Chief Greyhawk Perkins, commented Dreams Foundation Executive Director Danielle Watkins. As a recognized expert on Native American and American colonial history, Perkins has inspired many audiences over the years, sharing tales of ancient cultures as a tribal storyteller and as a teacher of various subjects in Louisiana's school system. The registration form for Camp Unique can be found on the Dreams Foundation of Acadiana website, the dreamsfoundation.aca.org. Volunteers are also being sought at this time, so if you're interested in volunteering at this special, very special Camp Unique, complete the applications on the Dreams website under the Volunteer tab. For more information about Camp Unique, contact Danielle Watkins via email at Danielle, that's DONIELLE at dreamsfoundation.org, or by phone at 337-962-1609. Vitalant begins testing on blood donations for antibodies to COVID-19. Vitalant became the first national blood bank to test all blood donations for antibodies to SARS-CoV-2, coronavirus that causes COVID-19. The nation's largest independent nonprofit blood collector serving hospital patients in South Louisiana for many years is providing the test results to donors who complete successful blood donations, which are critically needed now. The antibody test authorized by the Food and Drug Administration will indicate if the donor's immune system has produced antibodies to the virus, regardless of whether they have showed symptoms. It's possible that over time, the broad use of antibody tests and clinical follow-up will provide the medical community with more information on whether a person who has recovered from COVID-19 is at a lower risk of infection, and if so, for how long. For more information, you can visit vitalant.org/COVID-free. If you're willing to give a donation, appointments are strongly recommended. So again, you can visit vitalant.org or call 877-258-4825. That's 877-258-4825. All right, let's look at our day in history. Today is Monday, June 22nd, the 17th day of 2020. There are 192 potential shopping days left in the year. Today's highlight in history: on June 22nd, 1940, during World War II, Adolf Hitler gains a stunning victory as France was forced to sign an armistice 8 days after German forces overran Paris. Excuse me. On this date in 1815, Napoleon Bonaparte abdicated for a second time as Emperor of the French. In 1911, Britain's King George V was crowned at Westminster Abbey. On this date in 1941, Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, a massive invasion of the Soviet Union. In 1944, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, more properly known as the GI Bill of Rights. Excuse me, I seem to be having a slight coughing situation. In 1945, the World War II battle for Okinawa ended with an Allied victory. On this date in 1970, President Richard Nixon signed an extension of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that lowered the minimum voting age to 18. 1977, John L. Mitchell became the first former U.S. Attorney General to go to prison as he began serving a sentence for his role in the Watergate cover-up. He was released 19 months later. 1981, Mark David Chapman pleaded guilty to killing rock star John Lennon. And 1987, actor-dancer Fred Astaire died in Los Angeles at the age of 88. 1992, the U.S. Supreme Court and RAV versus City of St. Paul unanimously ruled that hate crime laws that banned cross-burning and similar expressions of racial bias violated free speech rights. In 2012, ex-Penn State assistant coach Jerry Sandusky was convicted by a jury in Bellefonte, Pennsylvania, on 45 counts of sexually assaulting 10 boys over 15 years. 10 years ago, White House Budget Director Peter Orszag announced he was stepping down. South Carolina Republicans chose Nikki Haley, a Tea Party favorite, to run for governor. She went on to win a runoff in the general election. 5 years ago, the Obama administration released a report on global warming that said failure to act on climate change could cause an estimated 57,000 deaths a year in the United States on poor air quality by 2100. And on a side note, it was reported yesterday in Siberia, Russia, which is near the Arctic, is typically a very, very cold region, but yesterday reached the temperature of 100 degrees. And if that doesn't say something about climate change, I don't know what does. 10 years ago, White House Budget Director we already did that. 5 years ago, the Obama administration released a report on global warming, and we already did that. 1 year ago, officials at the Santa Anita racetrack banned Hall of Fame trainer Jerry Hollendorfer after a fourth horse from the stable died at the track. It was the 30th horse death overall since the racing season began at the California track in December. In today's birthdays, we have actress Prunella Scales from the TV show Fawlty Towers. One of my faves is 88. Senator Dianne Feinstein, Democrat from California, specifically San Francisco area, is 87. Singer-actor Chris Christopherson is 84. Actor Michael Lerner is 79. Fox News analyst Britt Hume is 77. Singer Peter Asher of the group Peter and Gordon is 76. Let's see, singer-musician Todd Rundgren is 72. Go Todd. Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat from Massachusetts, is 71. Actress Meryl Streep is 71. Actress Lindsay Wagner is 71. Singer Alan Osmond of the Osmond Brothers is 71. Actor Graham Greene is 68. Pop singer Cyndi Lauper, 67. Actor Tim Russ, 64. Let's see, Bruce Campbell, actor, producer, writer Bruce Campbell is 62. Actress Tracy Pollan is 60. And rock singer, musician Jimmy Somerville is 59. And that about wraps up the birthdays. Looking at the zodiac or the horoscope, Cancers. Deal with sensitive issues and solve problems. Being compassionate and understanding will encourage honesty, trust, and resolution in others. Choose intelligence over aggression, and you'll receive unexpected rewards. Leo, take pride in what you do. A change may tempt you, but don't act in haste. Focus on fitness, honing your skills, and encouraging or enforcing a practical plan. Virgos, my birth sign, an old acquaintance will extend information that will change the way you think or do things. A heart-to-heart discussion will improve a meaningful relationship. Libra, slow down and take time to absorb information before you try to tackle pressing situations. Taking care of your needs first is in your best interest. Scorpio. Okay. Sagittarius, keep an open mind, but don't believe everything you hear. Arguments won't solve anything, but intelligence and compromise will help you keep the peace, make self-improvement a priority. Capricorn, work with someone like-minded to build a solid foundation for new prospects. Positive change at home will bring you closer to a loved one. Aquarius, move things around and clear a space to work on a project that excites you. Personal gains look promising. Commit to something or someone who will contribute to your happiness. Pisces, if you express your thoughts and feelings, you'll find out where you stand. Information you receive will help you make a positive change to how you live and work. Aries, take a step back and focus on self-improvement, personal gain, and taking better care of yourself. Refuse to get involved in an unnecessary argument with someone who is looking for a fight. And Taurus, make a change that will put a smile on your face. Treat yourself to something special. Discuss your plans and be open to suggestions. You'll receive valuable information. And Geminis, take physical action if you want to get things done. Set high expectations and deliver what you promise. Do the work and reap the rewards. Don't give in to temptation or shortcuts. And as always, the horoscope is an entertainment feature not based on scientific fact. I just got brought some water by my wonderful son, so I'm going to take a sip here to clear out my throat. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to do so. And we'll look at the funerals in the Acadiana area today. Jean Barranco at graveside services at Bodwin Cemetery in Youngsville at 1 p.m. And Carolyn Toops, Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic Church in Erath at 11 a.m. Okay, let's look at the last news story for the morning, or actually the last regular news story, and then we have a sports story to read. Gas emissions reduction plan sought. Governor's office forming task force to tackle issue by Mark Shivelstein. A new state task force has been given a deadline of 12 to 18 months to come up with a science-based comprehensive strategy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Louisiana, the majority of which come from oil and gas utilities and petrochemical and other industrial sources, according to a state official advising the task force program. The Louisiana Climate Initiative's task force is projected to have about 20 members who will be selected over the next month, said Lindsay Cooper, a policy analyst in the Governor's Office of Coastal Activities, which is overseeing the program. Its members will include representatives from 8 state agencies, both houses of the legislature, business and industry, nonprofit and advocacy groups, and academia. She told the board of the State State Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority this week. Also representative will be what state officials term marginalized communities. The 8 state agencies are the Division of Administration, Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, Public Service Commission, and the Departments of Agriculture and Forestry, Economic Development, Environmental Quality, Natural Resources, and Transportation and Development. Governor John Bel Edwards announced in February that the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions would be a key goal for his second term. Science tells us that the rising sea level will become the biggest challenge we face, threatening to overwhelm our best efforts to protect and restore our coast, Edwards said in announcing the task force plan. Science also tells us that sea level rise is being driven by global greenhouse gas emissions. Cooper said the task force visions will be to reduce emissions to limit climate change impacts that harm the state's natural and cultural heritage, while adapting to maintain the state's position as a world leader in energy, industry, agriculture, and transportation. The importance of shrinking Louisiana's emissions as part of a worldwide strategy aimed at slowing sea level rise can be seen in the estimates of future and loss in the state's coastal master plan. The plan shows significant differences are possible over the next 50 years in the amount of coastal land loss and the effectiveness of restoration projects and of flood risk reduction measures like levees based on low, moderate, and high estimates of greenhouse gases. By year 50, the state is expected to see close to $7 billion a year in food damage costs under the low emission scenario, while $12 billion a year under the medium scenario, and as much as $18 billion a year under the high emissions scenario. And without significant reductions in worldwide emissions, those annual costs will skyrocket in the following 50 years, she said. Cooper provided an example of what the state level rise differences means for the state's master plan projects by using a South Terrebonne Marsh creation proposal as an example. Under the low emission scenario, the project would create about 37 square miles of new land south of Dulac. But under the high emission scenario, sea level rise would result in the vast majority of the land disappearing, in addition to the disappearance of many square miles of adjacent wetlands. Since we are aware of the impacts of sea level rise, we should be doing everything we can to combat the impact through actions now, which includes addressing emissions, she said. Based on the 2015-2016 estimates produced by the U.S. Department of Energy, Louisiana ranks number 5 in total emissions and emissions per capita in the United States, and 4th when comparing the state's carbon emissions with its gross domestic product. Dwarfing the state's emission in terms of total carbon equivalent gases released are Texas and California, which rank 1st and 2nd, with Florida and Pennsylvania ranking 3rd and 4th, with emission numbers just above Louisiana. Louisiana is an energy-producing state, so our position as high-ranking in emissions makes sense, Cooper said. We don't want our value as an energy hub to be undermined as the state seeks to reduce emissions, she said, but we must balance that position as an energy leader with supporting our sustainable coast. That will require a recognition that the state's reliance on energy production does have a negative side, she said. To determine how emissions should be reduced will require a science-based review of existing emission sources, which hasn't been done by the state since 2012, when the LSU Center for Energy Studies produced a comprehensive greenhouse gas inventory for the Louisiana Department of economic development. The task force, which will be instructed to complete an update of what that inventory within 6 months of its first meeting, Cooper said, and it will be used to direct the strategy. To assist in that process, the Coastal Activities Office has reviewed similar climate task force efforts conducted by 12 states, including executive orders issued by the governors and associated strategy documents. Officials have also conducted 26 interviews with key stakeholders, including university researchers, other academic experts, representatives of industry and utilities, representatives of state agencies, and of nonprofit organizations, including environmental groups. That really gave us the full scope of this issue in Louisiana, she said, and it did reveal to us that many of these industries are already taking strides on their own to reduce their emissions and reduce their environmental impact. To assist the task force, the state is setting up a scientific advisory group that will ensure that scientists are involved in policy decisions in a series of working groups with power production, distribution and use, land use, buildings and housing, transportation, agricultural, forestry, conservation, and waste, and manufacturing, mining, and oil and gas extraction. There also will be a separate finance working group that will examine the economic feasibility of the recommendations made by the other working groups. What we wanted to make sure we aren't just creating these big goals for emission reductions, but we're also creating feasible solutions for the short, medium, and long term, Cooper said. And it's now, by my estimate, 9:56, which means our audio portion of the news this morning has ended on our television stations, but we can still be heard on YouTube at AOC Community Media and on our online streaming radio station, which is Cypress Street Radio. That's CYPRESS Street Radio. And I just have one more story here about sports related, and we'll do that and maybe a couple PSAs and wrap it up. 3 Cajuns have virus, 7 more athletes quarantined, school says in release. 3 UL athletes have tested positive for coronavirus, and 7 others are in quarantine after possibly being exposed to the virus, the school said in a statement Saturday night. The news release didn't specify the athlete's name or say how many athletes played for which sports teams. UL was the second Louisiana college on Saturday to report positive cases among athletes. LSU, according to sources, had several football players test positive and has a total of 30 football players quarantined. Last week, LHSAA Executive Director Eddie Bonine revealed that a small number of high school football players have tested positive for COVID-19 at 4 schools scattered across the state just over a week after voluntary workouts began. Saturday's news also fell on Louisiana's highest total of new COVID-19 cases, 870 since April 10th, 970. It's the first time the state has reported more than 700 new cases in 4 consecutive days since April, a troubling sign as the Louisiana Governor John Bel Edwards moves towards phase 3 of his plan to reopen the state. Voluntary in-person workouts at UL began June 8th as Cajuns athletic director Brian Maggard cited safety as the school's top priority. Our number one priority is the health and safety of our student athletes and staff, Maggard said. This process of determining and implementing proper protocols to follow as we reopen our facilities to voluntarily workouts has been made possible with collaboration between university leaderships, team physicians, and local and state authorities. These protocols will allow our state athletes and coaches to prepare for the upcoming sports seasons in an environment that prioritizes safety. The Raging Cajuns are scheduled to open their season September 5th against Mymedicaid State at Cajun Field. And now just a couple more public service announcements this morning. AOC teams up with the United Way of Acadiana for Learn United. United Way of Acadiana has teamed up with AOC and other local educational groups for Learn United, bridging the digital gap to provide educational resources for households that don't have internet but do have a television. The Learn United program airs weekdays from 8 to 2 on AOC 2 and Cox 16 and LUS 4, and streaming at AOC Inc. unitedway.org/watch for daily schedules and to submit content for the program. Visit United Way of Acadiana's website at unitedwayofacadiana.org/learn-united. Keeping calm through the COVID hotline if you're feeling overwhelmed with stress, fear, and anxiety about the uncertainty surrounding this public health emergency. There is a special Keeping Calm through COVID hotline you can call. This connects you to trained, compassionate counselors who can offer support and who can direct you to mental health and substance abuse counseling services in your area. Trained counselors are available 24/7 and all calls are confidential. If you're interested, please call 866-310-7977. That's 866-310-7977. Medicaid resources. If you've lost your job, if you have reduced hours, you may be eligible for Medicaid. You can apply online at mymedicaid.la.gov. You can also call 1-888-342-6207 or send your information via email or via mail or snail mail, as we like to refer to it, to Louisiana Medicaid, P.O. Box 91283, Baton Rouge, LA 70821. You can also call 888-342-6207. That's 888-342-6207. Locally, you can call 311 for Stop the Spread, call instead. You can, 311 offers a call center with volunteers, medical professionals that are active 24/7 to answer any questions you have about COVID-19 and to determine if you need to get screened. You can also call 311 and press option 2 if you're a business owner, employee, or are looking for a job to get information about applying for a small business recovery loan, apply for unemployment benefits and related programs. And finally, the last public service announcement, Lita, individuals whose hours are being reduced or at work or have been laid off from employment may qualify for unemployment insurance benefits. You can contact Lafayette Acadia Workshop Solutions Office at 337-262-5601. Due to the high call volume, some calls may not be answered immediately. In addition to unemployment insurance benefits, individuals looking for supplemental income can consider local employment opportunities with businesses who are seeking temporary, part-time, and full-time workers by visiting the COVID-19 Help Wanted resource page at lafayette.org/helpwanted or Lita's virtual job fair page with local businesses seeking to hire local candidates for full-time employment opportunities at lafayette.org/jobs. And that about rounds up our morning. My thank you to Matt for taking over the first half hour as I was detained, and I appreciate that very much, Matt. Matt the engineer, Matt the man, Matt the man. So this is Bruce saying thank you for tuning in. If you're interested in becoming a reader for the newspaper program, for our online, for our Monday through Friday, for our Monday through Friday newspaper reading of the Acadiana Advocate, we encourage you to go online at our homepage, aocinc.org. Look up the volunteer reading form, fill it out, and please come join our family. As always, again, this is Bruce Cohen. I wish you to be safe and healthy. And if you go outside, please take protocols, wear your mask, wash your hands, sanitize, do all the things so we can stop the spread and control this deadly virus. And as always, be kind to each other. Have a good morning.